Thank you to all the speakers thus far in this session. The work is never done in the world of conservation and advocacy. And the impressive talks today give one a glimmer of hope for the future, especially in adapting to legislation and protection of both people and animals alike. And I'll be honest, the talks have been so thoroughly impressive that I find them all a bit of a hard act to follow. Nevertheless, I'll give it a whirl. Hello, virtual crowd. Hello, people in person with me in Oklahoma. I've dropped the text and slides for this talk into the Slack, and as Mary Beth said, my name is Rebecca Ramsey, she, her. I'm currently a research analyst at the University of Kentucky, mom to 2 kiddos, a wife, and in my spare time, I'm also a graduate student in the digital mapping program at the University of Kentucky. My Twitter handle for all the mappy tweets is 2 R's, Ramsey Maps, and I've also included the link to my personal portfolio. Now, rates and fees may apply. This is a common phrase in this day and age, but in this instance of this particular map, rates and fees still apply. And today I'll be discussing in particular the 2018 Kentucky County phone rates from jail. Now, this map was created as a culmination of my first 3 master's classes at the University of Kentucky in the Digital Mapping and New Map Plus program. These classes include Introduction to Mapping, Programming for Web Mapping, and Design for Interactive Web Mapping. And the last 2 classes were taken during the height of COVID. Now, I don't know about anyone else, but I binged loads of podcasts during 2020. So much so, I've frequently referred to podcast hosts on a first-name basis with my husband in conversation. This map was inspired by a particular episode of On the Media with Brooke Gladstone, a podcast through WNYC Studio. The specific episode that piqued my curiosity was titled On the Inside, Looking Out. The episode focuses on how the American prison system wasn't built for a pandemic, but spotlighted decades-old issues with incarceration, including access to information about news and policies. In short, a breakdown in communications entering and exiting prisons and jails. Incarceration facilities still operate with technology out of the 80s, with Walkman for music, typewriters, paper, pencils to compose letters, and time-constrained phone calls. Only recently have a few facilities incorporated technology like e-tablets, permitting limited email, still for a fee. This particular episode of On the Media is where I learned about the cost of communication from inside incarceration facilities and the outrageous fees and rates applied to time-constrained phone calls. Naturally, I wanted to explore what this was like in Kentucky, which is my hometown. The premise of this map is that I wanted to create an interactive website map for the fees of Kentucky local jails for a 15-minute phone call and do so in a way that makes it obvious what facilities are above or below or around the state average and by how much. Now, the first roadblock I encountered in attempting this map was that there was no shapefile, no geo-JSON, no special layer geolocating all the incarceration facilities within Kentucky. I could find federal prisons, but not the state-ran prisons or the jails. The best I could find was a beautiful PDF, choropleth, that stated the types of jail facilities within a county, no particular number per county, and it was all summarized across the state. So, thus ensued some sleuthing. I combed the internet using key terms like incarceration facility with every county name, detention center with every county name, and, for fun, jail and every county name. Fun fact, Kentucky has 120 counties. So, quick math, this required 360 individual internet web searches. Now, this doesn't compare to the 1 million that we were seeing in the mapping conservation challenges for the North American migratory birds, but it was a chunk of time. So, once I found an individual facility's website online, I would pull their physical address. An example there at the bottom is Fulton County Detention Centers, and pulling their address, and geolocated them. As you can see here, on this choropleth, I've geolocated the local jails, federal prisons, and state prisons. With this new and improved data set in hand, I could now merge the facilities' locations with data provided by the Prison Policy Initiative. Prison Policy Initiative is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that researches and advocates for criminal justice reform. They understand that national and state level data is often completely inaccessible. PDFs, and seek to provide access to this data and accompanying graphics to help progressive movement leaders in prison reformation. Now that we are halfway through the presentation, I will show you a taste of the map. The map itself is hosted on a website that also has some more text and other visual applications. But this is, of course, a static screen grab, but you'll get the drift. As I said before, the premise was to create an interactive website map with the fees of the local jails for a 15-minute phone call, and do so in a way that's a little obvious. Is it above the average? Is it below the average? Is it at the average? And when a user hovers over the circle, they'll actually see the name of the center, the provider, the phone contract provider, the cost for a 15-minute phone call, and then what % of the average of the state it actually falls upon. Now, the Prison Policy Initiative data that I accessed was initially at a national level, and it published the name of the phone contract provider and the facilities and their individual rates if the facility reported them. Not all facilities do. I simply filtered this data for only Kentucky facilities and merged them with the aforementioned geo-JSON of Kentucky facilities. On the text side of things, I used the geo-JSON I created and further modified it using Leaflet JavaScript library for interactive maps and vanilla JavaScript to produce the interactivity. On the journalistic side of things, I included more infographics, pie charts on the website to supplement it, and the majority of which I will briefly go over now. The Kentucky pretrial population has more than doubled since 1978, as you can see in this graphic. And by pretrial, we mean people that are sitting in an incarceration facility that have not yet been convicted. So innocent, guilty hasn't been decided. No matter what, you're treated equal in that instance. On any given day in Kentucky, there are approximately 13,000 incarcerated residents in their local jails. So they have a literal captive market. Now, the FCC placed caps in 2014 on the rates and fees imposed by federal prisons, but they couldn't do so for jails and detention centers, as those are governed on a local level. Notice how since 2014, the prices for phone rates in prisons have plummeted, while jails have remained roughly the same. Because of the outrageous fees, incarcerated persons are essentially cut off from their ability to maintain connections with their lawyers, their employers, and their family, all while waiting for a trial during which these instances no one has been convicted. There are many reasons for a legacy of high phone rates and fees. Jails can receive kickbacks or commissions based on the phone provider. Jails have less flexible budgets. Jails are less eager to think long-term as they are run by elected officials looking towards the next election. And additionally, the population that is impacted finds it difficult to sustain pressure on jail administrators versus those who are in prison who may be serving a life term. Compounding the issue is that since 1984, there has been a corporate consolidation of phone contract providers to 2 primary providers and 14 smaller entities, making it virtually impossible to negotiate better rates. And don't worry if you can't really read it, just focus on the fact that you have 2 big companies that have consolidated most of them. On the top is GTL in blue, in the middle is Securus in red, and on the bottom is some of those smaller entities. And to give you perspective, these rates range widely across Kentucky. They could be $2.10 for a 15-minute phone call and $11.30 for a 15-minute phone call, all in the same state. Now, what my map is lacking is the hidden fees, as those were not all reported for a facility. When receiving a phone call from jail, a person has a few options when they go to answer. Initially, they could connect the call for a special fee and pay the associated rates and taxes. Or they could set up an account to avoid the special fee for connection, which surprisingly is the more cost-effective option. However, there still remain many different types of hidden fees. This includes a fee to open an account to pay for your accumulated phone costs, a fee for having an account, a fee to listen to a voicemail, a fee to load money into your account, a fee to close an account, a fee to get a refund, a fee to receive a paper bill, and more. On top of this, persons living in poverty are the most likely to be incarcerated or have incarcerated loved ones, and are less likely to have bank accounts, so they tend to use money transfers. Even the money transfer companies get in on the business. They charge yet an additional fee to transfer money into an account. In Kentucky, that fee can range from $6.99 to $11.99 just to add money to an account. The stated end goal of incarceration facilities is the successful permanent reintegration of their members back into society as responsible citizens. But how are they expected to accomplish this if they're isolated from the community they are to return to? 15 years ago, the radio station WMMT at 88.7 on the dial began broadcasting pre-recorded toll-free call-in phone messages from friends and family members of the incarcerated during their Calls from Home program. The station, operating out of Whitesburg, Kentucky, continues to this day to offer this imperative service, reaching many prisons, regional jails, and detention centers, the range of which can be seen on the infographic on this slide on the right. Increasing the likelihood of relying on phone communications is your urban versus rural status as a county. The more rural a county, the less access most Kentuckians tend to have to public transportation. In the event a family does not own a vehicle, this increases the barriers between the incarcerated and their communities, thereby directing them to rely more on the phone communications and their associated fees. Rural counties are also known for a longer commute to their incarceration facilities. Increased commute time may require the visitor to take time off from work, thus risking the loss of critical income if they want to avoid paying phone rates and fees. So it's basically a lose-lose situation and a pay or pay in a different way situation. On top of the already rural travel distance, there are counties who export their incarcerated populations to other counties as they do not house their own local jail. This again increases the barriers between in-person communications of the incarcerated and their families in distance and pushes them in the direction of having to pay phone fees if wanting to maintain a connection. Incarceration facilities of Kentucky produce weekly reports of the number of people incarcerated within their facility. Reports that are so conveniently reported, again, in a PDF format. Back in May in 2021, when I first pulled the data for this project, the percent of a Kentucky County population incarcerated ranged anywhere from 0 to 7%. Now, I understand if you cringe when you look at percentages. I once had a professor who used the phrase percentages and ratios are just lies and damn lies. But with this caveat in mind, I still wanted a rough glimpse into what percentage of a county's population is impacted by the incarceration and the associated phone communication barrier. So I used the weekly report number of persons incarcerated in the county jails and the county's population from U.S. Census Bureau to calculate this percentage. And as you can see on the very bottom left, that's Fulton County. They actually have 7% of their population is incarcerated in jail back in May. And so 7% of your population and their families are impacted by these phone rates and fees. So now what? There's no better time than on the heels of the FCC's capped rates than now to begin a conversation, especially with Kentucky's elected officials about negotiating better phone rates and limiting abusive fees on the vulnerable populations that the incarceration facilities are attempting to serve. One of the ways to begin this conversation is to use infographics and accessed data like this map as a jumping off point for discussions with local leaders. The topics of the conversations proposed should include how jails should refuse kickbacks and commissions on phone rates and strike harder bargains with their providers. The only way to obtain the aforementioned end goal of successful permanent reintegration of members into society as responsible citizens is to halt the barriers that continue isolating these citizens from the communities they're expected to return to. And by no means is Kentucky unique. Take a look at your own states through the data with the Prison Policy Initiative, and you'll see this is not a local problem, it is a national problem. So thanks go out to NACIS for their travel grant initiative that I benefited from this year. A special shout out to my professors, Boyd Shearer and Rich Donahue, the University of Kentucky, for sharing their wealth of knowledge with me on this GIS journey. I should mention, all of the data that I collected or merged or created, it is provided on the website hosting the interactive map, which I will drop the link to in the Slack. So please spread the word, be inspired, use the data, spark a conversation at home. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions in the NACIS Slack, or feel free to message me on Twitter.